Happy Friday, you guys. I just had a Zoom call with several of you guys. It was great to see y'all again. And hopefully, I will get to see some more of you guys on Monday. But I wanted to go ahead and pick up with Sink or Swim and try to double up today since I wasn't able to post yesterday. So, where we last left off, Colton, going by Danny, he was out with Woody and Straub, and they had pulled up into New York Harbor, and they were looking at all the lights, and the Chief Kerr came up and said, "Stupid idiots." And the question that you guys had to respond to, and I got some great responses, was why did Chief Kerr call them stupid idiots? And he was referring to the people who make the calls in New York City because they're brightly lit on a dark night, and it makes them really easy targets for the German U-boats that are out there. It's kind of like a big old sign saying, "Hey, we're right here, attack us." So I had some great responses with that. And it really made Colton think that, there could be some German U-boats right there, really close to them, just lurking under the water. So we're going to pick up where we left off. Our job was to escort supply ships from New York down to the Naval Air Station off the tip of Florida in Key West. We had to be on high alert for U-boats lurking around the shipping lanes along the East Coast. Probably the same U-boats that had sunk ships near Ocracoke and inside of all those people on Jacksonville Beach. Along with those who knew how many others. There were 3 patrol crafts, including ours, protecting a dozen cargo ships loaded with weapons, food, vehicles, spare parts, and 100 other things needed to keep a 1,000-man naval base in operation. Destroyers and planes from the Naval Air Station, Key West, had to do their job too, patrolling the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico in case Germany tried to sneak attack the U.S. Plus, they had to keep the shipping lanes open for oil and other products we needed from South America, going up to ports in Houston and New Orleans. For the first couple of days, no matter whose watch it was, hardly anybody on our patrol craft slept. I knew I didn't. I couldn't say about Woody because the engine crew kept pretty much to themselves, but from what he told me, their chief had Woody working himself stupid going back-to-back watches. I spent one watch in the sonar room and my next watch in the crow's nest on lookout duty, scanning the silver ocean for signs of U-boat activity until I thought I was going blind. But after those first few days of a whole lot of nothing, no pings on the sonar to indicate submarine activity, no telltale reflections of periscopes poking up out of the waves to take the measure of us and our convoy, it was impossible for our minds not to wander to other things, like how nasty all our uniforms were getting and how bad everybody smelled after all these sweaty days at sea. The captain had given the order that nobody could take a shower. The plan was for the convoy to make the East Coast run without stopping at any of the ports along the way, so we had to preserve our supply of fresh water. Can you imagine? Not only that, but we could only brush our teeth twice a week. Oh. So everybody was getting pretty ripe. Can you imagine what that would smell like? Ooh. Then, to make matters even worse, the cook served up beans for dinner 2 nights in a row, and all the fart sacks in the world wouldn't have been any help in containing the gas attack that hit us next. Straub actually came crawling out through the canvas hatch onto the deck one evening, gagging from the smell and saying he felt like he was going to be sick. I didn't put too much stock in what he said since he had such a weak stomach and got seasick anytime the ocean got kind of rough. But then I went below and the stench hit me like a baseball bat, and I turned right back around and crawled out behind him. Finally, Chief Kerr took pity on us and told us to tie up all our dirty uniforms and toss the lines over the stern. The whole crew was just in skivvies and boots and sailor caps. And that was about all while we washed our clothes like that, pulled along behind the ship for 15 minutes until Chief ordered us to haul in the lines, and then he had us lay out our clothes all over the deck in the afternoon sun. They dried fast and smelled a lot better, but everything was stiff and salt encrusted and chafed our sunburned skin when we put it all back on. Still, there was the problem of none of us having bathed in a week and stinking to high heaven, as Straub put it. But at least the cooks quit serving us beans. The officers kept drilling us all the time, day and night, to make sure we were always prepared, and we were able to be at general quarters in 25 seconds when we spotted a U-boat. So far, though, there's still been a whole lot of nothing. The only excitement was on the sonar turned out to be a school of dolphins. 2 of the merchant ships miscalculated one of the zigzag turns and nearly rammed each other, but we were able to veer away at the last minute. A light rain turned a little heavier, and a few guys got seasick, but that passed pretty quickly too. Then one afternoon, halfway down the East Coast, a couple of miles off the North Carolina shore, I spotted something. I was up in the lookout post, trying not to think about how close we were to Mama and Danny, scanning all around with the binoculars, when a glint of light reflected off something silver and shiny out in the calm ocean. The convoy was plowing along at 12 knots, little under 15 miles an hour. Fast for us, but the conditions were good. I didn't sound the alarm because I didn't want to be the boy who cried wolf. I scanned back to where I'd just seen the reflection, but now I couldn't find it. I rubbed my eyes and then returned to the binoculars, sweeping back and forth over the quadrant of ocean. Still nothing. And then, just when I was convinced my mind, or my eyes, had played a trick on me, I saw it again. A periscope. I sounded the alarm and pointed so the officer on deck on the bridge down below could see it too, and the klaxon blared the call to general quarters. Guys scrambled up from below decks to their battle stations, and the pilot swung us away from the convoy to give chase to the U-boat. Meanwhile, whoever was in the sonar room must have located it too, because we had a more precise location, and soon we're at 20 knots, and then more racing toward the submarine. I stayed at my post to try to find and maintain visual contact, while below me the guys were busy turning the guns, loading the shells, and preparing to launch depth charges. My heart was pounding so hard I could practically hear it, and I wished I had a weapon, even though there wasn't anything I could do with it from where I was. My weapon was the binoculars and helping locate the enemy. And then we lost contact. As hard as I tried, I couldn't see anything. No periscope, no nothing. Word came up from the sonar room that there were no pings either, not even faint ones to indicate something large underwater moving away from us, like a U-boat retreating. We searched the area for half an hour to be sure, but still didn't turn up anything. Our signalman and our radio operator had alerted the merchant ships and the other escort vessels, 2 PCs, one flanking the convoy on the starboard side and the other trailing, but they couldn't find anything either. I felt bad and afraid Chief Kerr and Lieutenant Talley would think I was the boy who cried wolf. But that didn't happen. When my watch ended and I climbed down from the crow's nest, Chief told me I'd done a good job. You saw it before the sonar picked it up. But we didn't find anything, Chief, I said. Doesn't mean there wasn't something there, he responded. For all you know, we saved a ship today. Chased off a U-boat before it could get close enough or have time to aim and prepare to fire off a torpedo. Some things you just can't know. But that doesn't mean that you can ever relax. Because even if there wasn't something there today, and I'm not convinced there wasn't, there will be something tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. And it wants to do one thing and one thing only, and that's sink this convoy. I'm going to do chapter 14 as well, since we didn't get to read yesterday, and these are kind of short. The next afternoon, I was in the crow's nest on lookout again, only it was rougher seas, waves tall enough to hide a periscope half the time, though at least that meant a U-boat wouldn't be able to set its sights on any of our ships as well either. But I still managed to spot another one before sonar picked it up. A periscope, no doubt about it, which meant a sub possibly preparing to launch torpedoes. I sounded the alarm and the call to general quarters went out. Our PC lurching away from the convoy to give chase before the U-boat could fire. We made slower progress through the heavy waves, so we couldn't get there in time to fire our depth charges at the sub once it submerged. We all held our breath and scanned the ocean for any sign of a torpedo just under the surface, blasting toward a hole riding low in the water under a full load of cargo. But there was nothing, so after a few minutes we could all exhale. I kept up my search through the binoculars, not just in the direction of the U-boat that had disappeared on us, but further afield as well. We all knew the U-boats traveled in what they called wolf packs, stalking convoys like ours, one U-boat running reconnaissance and the other somewhere ahead setting a trap for whoever or whatever was coming. Sure enough, an hour later, there ahead of the convoy, I spotted another periscope. Once again, I gave the signal and out went the call to general quarters. Only this time, the captain gave the order for the battery team to aim the big .350 caliber and fire. I was surprised by how quickly they did, and seconds later there was a terrific explosion and an enormous plume of water shot up into the sky. "We got one!" I yelled, though there wasn't anybody near to hear me, especially with the engines racing below and the ship hammering through the waves. "We got one!" Only it quickly became apparent that we hadn't gotten one. We hadn't gotten anything. So the order went out to fire again and again as we drew closer. The captain also gave the orders to launch depth charges. I guess the sonar guys must have found our target by then and were able to hone in on it quick. When the depth charges detonated, it felt as if our PC was blown 10 feet straight out of the ocean. I pitched wildly on the lookout platform and thought I was going to fall off or be flung out far over the deck and into the ocean. The next depth charge rocked us again. It was like riding a wild bronco the way the ship bounced and slammed hard back down. Alarms went off signaling men to go below for emergency repairs, which we drilled for 100 times, the same as we'd done drills for general quarters and the rest. I searched the ocean for signs that we'd actually hit the U-boat, an oil slick, pots and pans, mattresses, bodies, but nothing came up. The convoy steamed ahead, but we held back, circling the area where we dropped the depth charges and shelled with the forward gun. Once again, the U-boat had gotten lucky, but so had we. Our luck didn't hold for too long, though. Over the next couple of hours, those rough waves grew even rougher and more ominous as afternoon turned into evening. We caught back up to the convoy, at least for a while, but as the waves kept growing higher, pretty soon our attention turned fully to just trying to stay afloat. The storm would protect the convoy from any U-boat wolf pack, but for now, as we pressed on south through the Black Sea and sky, it was every ship for itself. That wasn't a problem for the merchant ships, as big and as heavy as they were, lumbering along, but it did make things more difficult for us PCs. We soon found ourselves climbing up the steep front of giant waves, then cresting at the top with the bow, and what seemed like the whole front half of the ship out of water, and then racing down the other side of the swell, our propellers churning and whining until they were back under. I was long since off the lookout platform, but there wasn't any point in me doing my watch in the sonar room, since no U-boat would ever be able to attack in a storm like this. The wolf pack would be running silent and deep, waiting out the storm far below us while we battled the killer waves. Whatever sea legs guys had grown into over the last couple of weeks were gone now with waves so big. The only good thing was that the ship rode a lot higher in salt water than in fresh water, so when we plunged into the ocean at the bottom of each wave, the bow didn't go as deep as when we went through storms back at Lake Huron, and not quite as much water covered us as we bounced back up. Chief Kerr called me from the sonar room to the pilot house, where the officers on duty and the navigator ran the ship and when the weather was too bad for them to be on the bridge. And on the way I realized that once again, I was one of the few men on the ship who wasn't doubled over and sick. It was slow going with the howling wind and the waves and the spray. I clipped on a safety line and made my way up to the pilot house with the chief and the executive officer. It didn't look so good either. The door slammed so hard behind me that I thought it would take off my leg. I half expected Chief to tell me to take the wheel, but of course that wasn't going to happen to a seaman second class with no training, and it didn't. Instead, he wanted me to go back down to the mess and bring back coffee and sandwiches. I might not have been seasick like most of the rest of the crew, but the idea of eating just then did make my stomach turn. But Chief just yelled the order again, and off I went, making my way from the pilot house and down the hatch to the galley, stepping carefully around sailors slumped everywhere, and stepping around where they'd puked too, which wasn't entirely possible. In the mess, I filled thermoses with black coffee and braced myself as best I could to pull out bread and bologna and anything else I could grab to throw on there. Then it was back topside, holding on to the grub with one hand and the rail with the other. Every step seemed to take 5 minutes as I got thrown side to side, 2 paces forward, 1.5 aft. I was exhausted by the time I got back to the pilot house, but happy I'd finally made it. I was happy I'd been able to do something to help the men who were steering us through this awful storm as well. Chief Kerr just cursed and said the coffee had gotten cold, but he ate 1 whole sandwich in 2 bites and then did the same with the other. The executive officer just waved me off. They let me stay in the pilot house, though, and I had a front row seat to the wild climb and fall of the ship up and down those mountainous waves. No turning to run with the wind and the waves as we struggled to keep up where we at least thought the convoy was. As best I could tell, we were navigating totally with instruments, except when enormous bolts of lightning split the sky in front of us and lit up the way, just for a second. And then we were plunged back into an even darker night than before our eyes adjusted. Chief called me back to him after another hour. I kind of had an idea about what was coming, and I wasn't wrong. "More coffee, sailor," he shouted, shoving the thermos into my hands. "And this time, get your sorry butt back up here while it's still hot." The storm was starting to pass, judging by the size of the waves, which were still high enough to break over the bow. But at least we weren't having to make those steep climbs and gut-punch drops anymore. Just before I climbed back down under the canvas hatch to the galley, I saw someone climbing up out of the engine room hatch further aft on the deck. Lightning crackled overhead, lighting up his face. It was Woody, who I hadn't seen in a couple of days, and not much at all since we left New York Harbor a week earlier. That's how it was with the engine room crew. They were like trolls down in their dark dungeon. The ship slammed through a wave and water rolled down the length of the ship, knocking Woody off his feet. He wasn't in any danger, but it must have hurt when he landed because he didn't have a life vest on for protection or to cushion the fall. "Hey, Woody!" I yelled over the howling wind. I carefully made my way back to check on him. But before I could get there, he staggered to his feet and stumbled over to the rail. Without a safety line, still without a life vest. "Stop!" I yelled. "You idiot, it's not safe." Woody turned to face me. He must not have known I was there before because his blank face crinkled up into a grin and he lifted his hand to wave, as if we were just on the street somewhere and happened to run into each other. Instead of in the middle of a still raging ocean storm. I didn't have time to say anything else because just at that moment, another wave hit the ship and swept Woody over the side. "Man overboard!" I shouted as loud as I could. "Man overboard!" I kept shouting it as I unclipped myself from the safety line, grabbed a life ring, and made my way to the rail. I searched for Woody until I saw him, waving his arms frantically as waves crested over him. I looked around and saw nobody. I kept yelling for help and started to go find somebody. But I knew if I didn't do something right then and there, that Woody wouldn't survive. I was so scared, I actually wet my pants. And then, whispering a quick prayer, I jumped over the side of the ship to try to save him. And we'll pick up there on Monday. Have a great weekend, guys.